Hello. Welcome to the Online Ethics Center's Spring 2023 webinar series, Bringing Ethics into the Conversation. I am Caitlin Wiley. I'm an associate professor in science, technology, and society at the University of Virginia, where I teach engineering ethics and data ethics. So in case you don't know, the Online Ethics Center is a digital repository for resources on teaching and learning about ethics in engineering and science. The OEC also fosters a community of faculty, students, researchers, and other professionals who come together to discuss ethics. So please check out our website at onlineethics.org. The theme of our spring webinar series is engineering justice. So I'm delighted to host our speakers today, Britt Holbrook and Elliot Douglas. They're going to tell us about their plans for a community of practice that they're building through the Online Ethics Center that focuses on engineering and social justice. So really, this is an opportunity for you as the audience to tell us how we can build this community in a way that will serve you. So Britt Holbrook is Associate Professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences and Director of the Center for Ethics and Responsible Research at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. His research combines topics relevant to contemporary science policy, such as open science, altmetrics, and broader impacts requirements for grants, and topics of perennial concern, such as ethics education, peer review, academic freedom, and the role of the university in society. Elliot P. Douglas is Professor of Environmental Engineering Sciences and Engineering Education, as well as Distinguished Teaching Scholar at the University of Florida. His research interests are in engineering problem solving, diversity and inclusion, and social justice for engineering ethics. He's also a fellow of the American Society for Engineering Education, and he currently serves on the ASWE Board of Directors as Pick One Chair. So after their talk, we look forward to discussing questions from you. To ask a question, please type in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then I'll read it out loud to Britt and Elliot. So Britt and Elliot, thanks for being here. Over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so Elliot and I are the fellows leading this community of practice on engineering and social justice. But we sort of just got it started and off the ground. And so what we wanted to do with this talk was to sort of give you an idea of where the two of us are coming from, tell you where we have ideas for where the community of practice could go, but also sort of recruit people who obviously are interested in this sort of topic because they've showed up to the webinar to join the community of practice and help us fashion the future. It's not well established yet. It's newly established, and so anyone who joins has an opportunity to help us go forward in ways that the community wants to go. So without further ado, let me give you a little bit of background on how Elliot and I started collaborating. And this, I think, will give you some idea of where we're coming from and why we decided to take on the role of fellows in this community of practice. In 2018, Elliot and I were both part of a group that was participants in Camp Engineering Education After Next. This was a really interesting and fun and fruitful event where Donna Riley had some money to run essentially a summer camp. And the idea of this was to think not just about the next thing for engineering education, but the thing after the next thing. And so we were encouraged to be quite experimental and risky. And our group got together and we decided that what we wanted to do was come up with a way of inculcating concern for and attention to social justice with engineering ethics and engineering ethics education. And so Elliot and I and the other members of this group have actually been collaborating since 2018.
So one of the reasons I'll I'll mention that one of the neat things about our group, we were the only group with a non-academic in it. We had invited a person who is resident of Flint, Michigan, Yvonne Lewis, who founded the National Center for African American Health Consciousness. And so, you know, we really want to get that expertise of being in a community that had faced these kinds of issues, because it really is a form of expertise to kind of counter this idea of the culture of disengagement that Aaron Seck talks about, and others have since, you know, collected data on this. But here's some of Aaron Seck's data from a fairly well-known and talked about paper. What she looked at was students' belief in the public welfare values of engineering over their time in school. And you know, the main thing that comes out of this, if you see from the data, is from the dark blue to the light blue. Dark blue is essentially when they enter school, and then the light blue is when they leave. And their beliefs in engineering as a service to public welfare decreases over time. And the reason for that, at least one proposed reason, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. This is where she asked the students the extent to which their programs emphasize different aspects, technical versus what she called engagement relevant activities, or what we might call professional skills or non-technical. And you can see there's this clear divide between the technical and the engagement relevance. Now, you know, if you had asked me to predict what this would look like ahead of time, I probably would have said that yes, the technical is going to be of higher emphasis than these engagement relevant, but there might be some overlap. Maybe writing is going to be higher than invention or something like that. And so it's really stark to me how sharp this divide is between the technical and the engagement relevant. And the reasons for this has to do with people propose is how we educate students, right? We focus on the technical. What are engineering classes mainly about? It's mainly about doing calculations. Can you solve this technical problem? Can you calculate this thing? Can you analyze a bridge? Ethics and things like that are relegated to extra stuff, and don't really, you know, various people have done, you know, follow-on studies to show that, you know, things like ethics, justice, policy is considered to be not engineering. Engineers who do that stuff are, you know, even themselves say, I am not an engineer, or I don't do engineering work, even though it clearly is tied up in engineering. And so part of what we want to do is we want to counter this discussion, this narrative around engineering is only technical, by talking about how justice and engineering are heavily entwined.
I should mention too that it's engineering is not alone in this. Philosophers, I am a philosopher, so I know whereof I speak in this regard. Philosophers also tend toward the technical, and even in areas such as applied ethics, what you'll often get if we think we're moving beyond the theory, but instead of moving beyond the theory and actually engaging with real ethical problems in the world, what we do is talk to other applied ethicists about how we could solve these actual problems, but we don't actually go about solving the problems or trying to work on them, and we turn it into an academic subdiscipline of philosophy. And the interesting thing for me as a philosopher is this also leads to, in part, leads to a separation between the notion of ethics and the notion of social justice. And so within the field of philosophy, what you get is people who work on ethics are not the same people who work on issues of social justice, and they don't really even talk to each other that much. The conferences are different, the publications are different. And so by trying to incorporate a concern for social justice into an engineering ethics class, that we hope also will have an impact on the field of philosophy and turn us a little bit more toward the real world.
So out of this discussion, we talked about various aspects of how we could continue collaboration after the camp. And one of the things that came out of it is Britt had just taught engineering ethics for, I think, 2 semesters. And I think I had taught it once, or maybe I hadn't taught it at all yet. I had been, I was picking that class up. And so we thought this would be a fruitful area of collaboration to work together on designing an engineering ethics class around this issue of social justice. And we applied for an NSF I use EHR, or now NSF I use EDU grant. And we got that. We're in the midst of that project right now. And the objectives for that grant were to design this engineering ethics course around social justice, implement it in 2 distinct settings, obviously NJIT and University of Florida, very different kinds of institutions, taught by 2 very different kinds of people, an engineer versus a philosopher, and collect preliminary data to show the efficacy of this course. We're not going to talk a ton about this, but we want to give you just a little bit of a background so you understand where we're coming from on this idea.
Yeah, and when you take a look at who's involved in this research project, take a look, especially at our advisory board, because 2 of the 3 members of the advisory board, Yana Limbranidou and Yvonne Lewis, who Elliot had already mentioned, were part of our group at Camp Engineering Education After Next. And Michael Louie was actually also a participant there, but not in our group. But we had to replace Wenda Bauschwies, who was the other member of our group, as an advisory board member, because she rotated back to NSF and could no longer serve as an advisory board member. And so this has kept this group together and in dialogue for 5 years now. Well, going on 5 years, it'll be 5 years this summer. And so I think that is really a great thing.
So again, without going into a lot of detail, we used the understanding by design, which is a backwards design approach for the class. And we can give you some resources for that. What I just wanted to point out is that one of the processes in designing the class is to identify the essential questions. What do we want to address? What are the kinds of things we want the students to wrestle with in the class? And these are the questions we came up with. Can ethics be taught? What is the nature of ethical expertise? Whose knowledge counts? That's very important for us because we have a lot of emphasis on listening. And Brett will talk about that some more in a minute. And you can see the others. How did engineering decisions affect society? If you look at these questions, you might recognize that these are very different questions than what you might see in a quote unquote typical engineering ethics class, which tends to be taught in either one of 2 ways, right? It's either like a professor of practice, someone who has experience in industry, teaching ethics, sort of maybe what they've come across, and very often around well-known disasters like the Challenger space shuttle explosion or the Volkswagen emissions, things like that. The other approach is that it's offloaded to a philosophy department. And so the philosophers teach it as, here are the various ethical, moral theories that we philosophers think about, maybe minimal application to actual engineering problems.
Or if we get really adventurous, we might teach them the ethical theories and then try to apply them to cases like the Ford Pinto.
Right. So we're trying to do something very different by very much incorporating them together. So for example, and we teach the class very differently, but I just want to give you one example of how we try to meld those topics together. I have a class where I teach consequentialism as a moral theory, but I don't start with that. The reading that the students do before the class is actually not on consequentialism, it's on engineering design. And the way I teach them consequentialism is we discuss engineering design as a consequentialist practice. And so for that way, they see that integration, so that's not devoid of context.
Elliot mentioned earlier that listening is a big part of both of our classes, and this is in part due to I would say, the influence of Jana Lambrinidou and Yvonne Lewis, who were, again, members of that group at Camp Engineering Education After Next. And this slide is a slide of a resource that's available at the Online Ethics Center called Learning to Listen, a tool for morally engaged engineering practice that Jana was the driving force in developing. And it basically lays out a lesson plan for how to use the idea of listening in a class. It's very detailed. Elliot and I, with Jana's help, both took that as a model, but then adapted it to our own contexts. And the reason that we wanted to use listening was in part due to our interactions at Camp Engineering Education After Next, where Yvonne really thought this was key, and a key sort of mechanism to, if not guarantee social justice, at least help to avoid injustice. And she, as part of our conversation, she talked about many examples where, if only people had listened, these things wouldn't have happened. And so one of the things that we don't do, well, we do a little bit, but not a lot, is foreground a bunch of theory about social justice. Instead, what we do is we try to get the students to experience what it would be like to think about engineering in the context of social justice. And we do this by using this Learning to Listen tool. So NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, is in Newark. This is Newark, New Jersey here. NJIT is sort of top left of this, behind the skyscrapers there. This is the Passaic River that you see in the bottom right corner, and that sort of concrete structure leading sort of through that building and to the bridge across the Passaic is Newark Penn Station, where many of you will have probably stopped on your way to and from New York City, but probably also not gotten out of the train because you don't want to go into the city of Newark. And one of the interesting things is that many of my students, and I get often second semester seniors taking engineering ethics, in part, I think, because they put ethics off to the end of their academic careers, precisely because of some of the stuff that Elliot mentioned earlier, where they don't see it as vital to their engineering education. So they just wait until they have to take it and do so at the very end. But they've been at NJIT for 3.5 or 4 years and haven't actually ventured out into the city of Newark itself. And so the assignment that I give them is to go out into Newark. So this is just a different view. You can see down there, just to the right of Newark, where you see a little picture of the train station. So that's Newark Penn Station. And you see University Heights there to the left, and that's the neighborhood where NJIT is located. And I actually live down there across from Red Bull Arena on Market Street. So I've been a Newark resident now for 7.5 years. And one of the things that I do is tell the students that Newark is not that scary and that they should get out and experience it. But the students are scared to do it. And so what I do is I have them get in small groups, usually groups of 3, and they go out into the city, and they engage a Newark resident. It can't be someone who commutes into work and doesn't live in Newark, about an engineering ethics related topic that is prominent in Newark. And just to give you guys one example, although there are many, right around the corner, right around the bend, less than a mile from my house, in the Ironbound, which is a mostly brown neighborhood in Newark, is the largest Superfund site in the US, the Diamond Alkali site, where the company that made Agent Orange did so there, and dioxin from the stuff that they were producing leached into the soil and into the Passaic River. And that's only one of the engineering ethics related issues in the city of Newark. And the students go out, and their task after they go through the listening exercises is to engage a Newark resident to talk about one of these issues and listen. And so what they're not allowed to record, they all want to record on their phones. They're not allowed to record anything. They're not allowed to take notes. They have to listen to the person. And it's not an interview. There's no set questions. They've learned how to listen. And so all of their questions come up spontaneously, but they're guided by what they've learned in the learning to listen portion of the class. And then they come back together and do very short class presentations where they talk about the topic that they were trying to address, who they met. They don't have to say the person's name, but they sort of say, describe who it was. It was a person who was living under the bridge and homeless at Newark Penn Station, or it was someone who told us that they'd lived in the Ironbound for all their lives, or whatever. They have to tell me who they talked to, and then report on what the person said. And then last of all is to talk about whether the exercise was valuable in the context of the course. And so this is something that happens at the very end of the course and all of the courses leading up to this assignment. But the grading is like minimal. It's just like part of their participation grade. And so this allows the students, I think, to take a risk, because it's a low impact assignment in terms of their grade, but it's a really high impact assignment, I think, and they've told me, in terms of their experience of the class.
And I do the same exercise. It's a little bit different because we're not an urban campus. And the other difference is that I have way too many students in my class to have time for all the groups to report out. So what I have them do is I have them record just very informal videos, typically on their phone, and upload them to our learning management system so I can see them. And then we have a day in class where it's kind of open discussion. So I open it up to any groups that want to share about their experiences. So I mentioned that the NSF grant, we're looking at the impact of this on students. And so, our research questions are, to what extent does this class affect students' perspective taking, and how much does it affect their moral efficacy? We do have a control group design. So we have at each of our institutions, we're doing the same survey in our classes, in a typical or traditional ethics class, whatever that means for us, and in a non-ethics class as like a control. You'll see our hypotheses there. And one of the things, we just came back from API, Association for Practical and Professional Ethics, and we did a presentation there where actually we tried to problematize these hypotheses. So, in the proposal, it's very neat and clean to say that, our hypothesis is that by taking the social justice class, they'll have greater improvements in perspective taking and in moral efficacy. But in fact, we question whether that's going to actually be true, because, as someone gains, there's the famous Dunning-Kruger effect, right? So if people tend to overestimate their knowledge when they're novices. And so what you see is, what we might expect is that students, maybe in a traditional ethics course, have much higher efficacy than our students, because in a traditional ethics course, maybe they're taught sort of a formula, right? If you go to the code of ethics, you can apply the code of ethics and then you know what to do. Whereas we're really problematizing all aspects of ethics and talking about how these are often very difficult, intractable problems that you can't really know what the correct solution is. You have to sort of work through what, your best guess, and then sort of see what happens. And that these are not simple problems like don't take a bribe. These are questions like, what do we do about development in terms of what was the class we just did? We had a great discussion back and forth where they kind of went back and forth and didn't really come to a conclusion because there was no conclusion to be reached. And so we think in that sense, maybe their efficacy will actually decrease by being in this one semester class.
Okay, so that's the end of talking about our class that we're doing together, but I wanted to tell everyone about another project that Elliot and I have been involved with. This also stemmed from an NSF grant that was to hold a workshop. But we got the grant, and then COVID hit, and the PI and I decided we really wanted to do this in person, and so it was delayed for quite a while. But we eventually did manage to hold the workshop in Washington, D.C.'s West End. And the goal of the workshop was to come up with an ethical framework for engineering research involving human communities. And the idea that we developed at the workshop was to figure out ways in which we could provide a framework similar to the framework provided by the Belmont report, because and for those of you who I'm assuming most of you do know about the Belmont report, but the Belmont report provides the framework for thinking about research involving human subjects. And so any research that does involve human subjects, especially at universities, tends to go through review by the Institutional Review Board, and they use the principles that were worked out as part of the Belmont report in order to make decisions about whether the research can go forward or whether it needs to be modified for various reasons. And this framework is really quite successful. I would actually argue that it's one of the most influential, the Belmont report itself, one of the most influential policy documents ever written by a philosopher. And so what we did was we modeled the West End report after the Belmont report, but we modified it. We didn't just use the principles from the Belmont report. And in fact, one of the things that we did was we identified very early on as part of this workshop the fact that working with communities is very different from the Belmont's emphasis on individual autonomy. People in communities don't act quite as autonomous individuals by the very nature of being in a community. And in fact, people in communities could be members of multiple communities, and different communities might have different perspectives on the same topic. And how do you sort of navigate that as an engineer if you're trying to have respect for communities? And so we try to tackle this in the West End report, which we hope will be coming out soon, the report itself. And one of the things that Elliot and I would like to do for the community of practice is actually put the West End report up and let people read it and react to it, and we can have discussions about it and ways in which it's valuable, ways in which it could be improved, ways in which it might be problematic. But we think that working with communities, and especially engineers working with communities, it is a rich topic for thinking not only about engineering ethics, but about the topic of social justice. And so we're hoping to have that up on our community of practice website soon, and have a lively discussion about it. That's part of our vision for the future. I would also add that Elliot and I both would really like to get students involved. I would say that from my experience, students really engage with the topic of social justice in a way that they might not with the topic of ethics. It's really interesting to me how students react when you start talking about issues of social justice rather than ethics. Ethics, I think they think is very dry, whereas social justice, I think they think is very important, perhaps very controversial, and in any case, something that they're into, and something that they're eager, I think, to think about in terms of whether their forthcoming careers as engineers could have an impact in the realm of social justice. So that's one of the things we want to do, is get students involved. I think it would be really good if we could get people in other countries involved, because of course there are many engineering and social justice issues that are prevalent in other countries that may or may not be prevalent in the United States. And so I think it would be worth getting international folks in there to educate us about those issues. And Elliot, what else? Do you have anything else you want to mention that we have in mind for the future?
Yeah, non-engineers, non-academics, industry people, community organizers, people like that, because this is bigger than just engineering. That's what we're kind of promoting. I think outside of that, I think what we don't want to be the ones driving the topics of discussion for this community of practice. We want the people in the community of practice to drive that. And so let me just share, this is how you would join the community of practice. If you go to this website at the Online Ethics Center, there'll be a link there. You have to be a member of the Online Ethics Center, which is free. You just click the link to create an account. Once you create an account, or if you already have an account, you go to this page and you'll be able to select from several communities of practice to join. And like we said, there's a discussion board. There's not been activity there yet, really, because we're just getting started, but we want to get that going soon.
And you shared that the link in the chat, is that correct?
Yes, I shared the link in the chat, and it was shared with everyone, so you should all have access to that link.
Awesome. Thank you, Britt and Elliot. It's great to hear how this project fits into your ongoing research and teaching, as well as what you hope will come out of this community of practice by bringing together these different kinds of collaborators. Mm-hmm. So while you guys are thinking of your questions, and write them in the Q&A box as you are listening, audience members, I wanted to ask you a little bit about infrastructure building for collaboration, because it's not easy to send students out to be our emissaries into communities. Like that, as you guys well know, that takes a lot of preparation for the students. It, as Britt talked about, not recording, you have to do this whole training session on how do you listen. And so I'm wondering how you think we can go about building ties between engineering courses, students, universities, companies, and communities that we want to work with.
I'll just share one thing that Britt and I had originally planned for the spring, but due to some circumstances, we weren't able to do it. We've talked about connecting our two classes. We talked about different ways of doing it. And so that's something I think we want to do in the future. And we decided to do it just by identifying, if you will, liaisons. So finding 2 or 3 students in each of our classes to serve as liaisons, and let them decide what to do. They're going to create a WhatsApp group or something else. We thought about different assignments they could do potentially together, but our schedules for our classes and the semester schedules didn't really line up well. So we thought maybe we could do it this way. So that's one, at least from institution to institution, is to find collaborators that you can do this sharing with, and hopefully we'll be able to report. This might be another point of discussion within the community of practice to do this and talk about how it worked and how it didn't work and what things could be done to make it work better.
I'll also add another example that came out of my students at NGIT. So this is students who took my class who are in NGIT's Honors College. And one of the things that the Honors College students do is they have a service requirement, and they have to do I think it's 10 hours a semester of service on campus and off campus. And they have reported to me that these are really shallow. Like, you know, they sort of go around and pick up trash on campus, or they help some student groups set up chairs for an event. And then off campus, they might go somewhere and make a bunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and then come back to campus. And what they said was, you know, we actually think that we could take some of the stuff we learned about listening from your class and enrich these experiences. So it's not just this sort of mechanical thing that we do, and so that we can think about service in a richer, deeper way. And so I would say leveraging activities that are already happening on any campus would be a good way of doing that. And I suspect, I know this is the case at NGIT, but I suspect it's the case at many other schools that have engineering programs. There's a thriving co-op program where students go out and work with various companies and then come back to campus, right? Well, if there were somehow a way of taking the skills that students learn in Elliot's class and mine, and having them sort of maybe even just sort of keep a journal when they go out, right there, and in this cooperative experience, and they write in their journal things that they've listened to and listened about, and their thoughts on these things, and then they come back and they have sort of a post co-op get together and share these experiences. I think that would be a really interesting way of doing it. It's potentially really enriching for the students, but it's really, I really have a bias in favor of things that are not huge efforts and not penal for students, but that give them the opportunity to do things that have potentially a huge upside, right? So it wouldn't even necessarily have to be a course assignment. It wouldn't be something that they are required to do, but if they choose to do it, they can. And then they have this discussion group, and you know, they get what experiences out of it they do, and you know, there you go. They can say that they did that. And maybe, you know, like my center could provide a web page where they could talk about those things. So like, you know, if they wanted to make videos, they could, or if they wanted to make blog posts, they could. Stuff like that, that I think is low risk for the students in terms of grades or anything like that. Not a huge time commitment, but that has potentially great reward.
Yeah, the educational benefits seem really clear. I'm a little worried about the effect on the community. You know, like in some ways, I would love for your community of practice to create some resources for instructors to lead these kinds of interactions responsibly, to prepare students well, to build those connections so that the community members aren't annoyed that we're sending out students to talk to them.
So this is one of the interesting things that I think came out of our discussions with Yvonne Lewis. You know, Yvonne was never very interested in, you know, engineers telling her about her community. She's an expert in her community, right? And so, you know, she pointed out just some simple things that were done. And I'll give one example just because it comes to mind, where people were delivering water to the citizens of Flint because they obviously couldn't use their public drinking water for various reasons. And so, you know, the sort of engineering solution is, well, we'll just ship in a bunch of bottled water and distribute it to the residents. And Yvonne said, so in they come, they set up the place with all the water to distribute to the residents, but they set it up in a stupid place. A place where it was really difficult for the residents to get to, and they couldn't like get there and then transport enough of the water back to their houses. And it was just super inconvenient, with the result that many residents just didn't bother doing it. And then the sort of engineering solution people are like, well, we shipped in the water, what do you want? Right. And so it was really interesting. And so in a situation like that, just listening to the community, if that's what you're teaching them, right? It's not like, oh, here's an infrastructure where if you do this, you'll be able to employ your engineering solution, but rather here's an infrastructure that allows you to listen to the community, that could inform, to give you information that could inform your decision making about what sorts of solutions you want to employ. I think that is the kind of thing that wouldn't be too much of an imposition on the community if what we're giving them is an infrastructure that allows them to be heard.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. That would be, that to me, that seems like the most desirable outcome, as well as students who are a little more thoughtful, like to empower these communities to have a voice at some place high status like NJIT. Okay, cool. So we have some questions about your class. First of all, is it mixed engineering majors? Is it tied to a particular major? Do you have any non-engineers? Can you compare across these student groups?
So yeah, that's one of the interesting differences between our classes. Mine is specifically an environmental engineering class, and Britt has a mix of majors within engineering. I don't know, do you have any non-engineers taking it, Britt?
I occasionally get a non-major who is taking the class for meeting core requirements in the humanities. Often it will be an architecture and design student, but for the most part, it is engineering students, but they're from various disciplines.
What I find being environmental engineering students, they're already very well attuned to this concept of social justice, and they really want it because for them, that's why they came into environmental engineering. Maybe they weren't thinking explicitly about social justice, but environmental engineering because they want to help fix the environment, protect it. And so they're kind of already very attuned to it. And so we don't have much trouble. I don't have much trouble really convincing them of the importance of it. What actually I have difficulty with is, I mean, both of us run our classes in a very discussion-based mode. I have difficulty getting opposing views. You know, they're all kind of there for the same reason. And, you know, I tell them, if you think I really want to hear from you about when you disagree, I joke with them. One of the final blog, well, I have them do blog posts every week. This is what they do for every class based on a reading. The last post they do for the semester is, well, the first post of the semester is, based on what you know, what are the ethical responsibilities of engineering? And you get kind of the typical stuff, safety and things like that, act responsibility. And then the last post is, you know, look back at your first post. What has changed for you, if anything, and why? And I told them one year I had a person who wrote on the post, oh, I didn't realize my opinions were so different from those of my classmates. And I tell the students, that was one of the most disappointing posts I've ever seen. And the reason is I didn't know it. The student did not speak up. And so I really try to push that. Of course, there's these social imperatives for them to not disagree with each other, but I try.
Yeah, I think my students do disagree with each other quite a bit and more openly. And I wonder how much of that is a factor of them being from different engineering majors and how much of that is just a different kind of atmosphere up in the Northeast versus a classroom in Florida, given the situation, you know, with you know, imposition of rules on university culture in Florida that isn't happening in New Jersey, thankfully.
No, I don't think that's it. I think the students that I have are very much, they disagree with some of the proposals that are being put forth by the state government.
So do you find, Elliot, that the curriculum about listening, do they apply that to each other? Are they using it in class? Not just with
again, like
members?
Britt, this comes at the end. So we've worked our way up through it, we're building to it. So they haven't had it yet, even this current semester. So, but that's an interesting question. What if I did that first as an introduction to, this is how we want to participate in the class? That would be an interesting way to go about doing it.
So that's
right?
it is an interesting question. And it would be an interesting question whether that makes a difference in comparing Elliot's class to mine as well. I also have the students write for every class and do blog entries, but it's on Canvas if people use that course management system, and I assign very early on, commenting on other people's posts, and then we'll have discussions in class based on what they wrote and stuff like that. So I have them engaging in conversations from the beginning, even if I don't teach them the way to listen until the second half of the semester. I think they're picking up on it as we go.
Oh yeah, I do the same thing, and I facilitate that conversation. And I'm going to try to get to the point where maybe, next week after spring break, I'm going to tell them, okay, I'm sitting down. I'm not going to facilitate the conversation anymore. So let's see where it goes.
Yeah, it almost seems like a nice way to say, we're noticing everyone is sharing the same opinions. What would make you feel safe sharing an alternative opinion? What does that mean for when you talk to somebody you don't know? What would make them feel safe to tell you the reality about their community, their Superfund pollution experience? It just seems like a nice way to connect what they're feeling with what other people are feeling in terms of perspective taking. Okay, so we have lots of questions about basically, how do you teach like you? Are there public resources available about syllabi or assignments for teaching ethics with a social justice bent? How do you assess it? Where can you point people?
So there is actually, if you go onto the Online Ethics Center website and go into the search bar and just type in social justice, that's where you'll find what I know as the best collection of resources on engineering and social justice. But I'll say this without trying to criticize at all OEC. There's not that many, and I think this is one of the things that our community of practice can do, is sort of add more resources, enrich that set of resources, and provide a place where people can come talk about their experiences using the resources. I'm sure that Yana would be thrilled to have a conversation if a bunch of people were using her Learning to Listen module. And the question of assessment is one that is a live question for me, because I'm the one who's constantly wondering, how do I assess this? And I go to, I'm just a philosopher. So I go to Elliot for the expertise in assessment, and we came up with these two measures. And then I said, but wait, Elliot, I'm worried about this for the following reasons. And so I want to assess whether what I'm doing is working because I think it is, because I get good feedback from students, but I want to be able to show it. But I don't think we've figured out how to assess it really well yet. And that's part of what we're experimenting with our class.
And let me add two things to that. One is if you're at, if you think about, is there a textbook or something like that? And the answer, as far as I know, is no, at least not something that we've found that works for us. So our readings, many of them are shared, and Britt finds one and he'll share it with me, and I'll find it and share it with him. These are just individual articles that are, or essays or things like that are we just post on Canvas, and students get to read it each week. If you ask about assessment in terms of the class, how do we assess the students for the purpose of grades? That's another interesting question. And we can talk maybe length another time about the philosophy of grading. But my goal, and I believe it's Britt's goal too, is not for them to learn a bunch of stuff. It's to help them think about things in different ways, and not even necessarily a way that I think they should, but a way that essentially gives them new tools for how to think and how to work as an engineer. So the grading is, in my class, for the most part, extremely low stakes. Like the blog entries, it's like, did you do it? And write something at least halfway meaningful. There's a paper. Really, these are the primary assignments, right? There's that, and there's a paper. For the paper, it's a very open topic. It's just identify some environmental issue that is of interest to you and discuss the ethical aspects of it. And they, can use any of the various tools we just talked about, approaches we talked about in class. And I make it, try to make it as low stakes as possible by having them do a draft that they turn in for full credit, and then I comment on it, and so then they can rewrite it based on my comments for their grade. So my goal isn't to like separate them and say you learned ethics well and you didn't learn ethics well based on some grade. It's just to get them to open themselves to engagement in different ways.
Nice. That does sound like a really important output of your community of practice, to bring together the resources that people are using in different settings. And so tell us about basically, how do you communicate what you're doing at the curriculum level or across departments? So what do other faculty expect that you're teaching? Are you aligning with ABET? How do you sell this course to your colleagues?
Well, ABET, of course, is, there's a couple of student learning outcomes that relate to ethics, but it's, ABET is pretty open. And so we discuss ethics, I have to assess whether or not students have achieved the outcome. And we have a whole system set up with rubrics, and I use the essay that they write to address ABET stuff.
I would say at NGIT, one of the interesting things is that the engineering ethics classes are all taught through the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. And until recently, every instructor was doing it their own way. And there was no sort of standardization of the classes. And that has the advantage of maximizing instructor freedom. But when it comes to assessment, that can be problematic, right? Because a student could take my class and get one thing, and then take somebody else's class and get something totally different. And so it's very difficult to say this course, not just my class, but this course satisfies the ABET learning outcomes that are relevant. And so just recently, what we did was we came together, the instructors of the engineering ethics classes at NGIT, and developed a standard set of learning outcomes for the course. And we preserved the instructional academic freedom of the instructors by saying you could, as long as you are meeting these learning outcomes, you can do that any way you want within the context of your own course. But no matter what, any student who's taken the engineering ethics class, regardless of instructor at NGIT, will have achieved these learning outcomes. And so I think that's a really nice way of doing it. If you design generic learning outcomes for engineering ethics classes, that will satisfy the ABET requirements, but then allow the instructors free rein in how it is they go about doing it. Now, I will say that once Elliot and I get all the evidence that what we're doing is way more effective than all these other ways of doing it, I will go out there and say, everybody should be doing it my way. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think that it would be interesting once we get our final set of data to do the comparison and say, hey, look, we have a way of doing it that has these effects. And if these are effects that you would like to have as an instructor, consider doing it our way. And that's in fact the follow-up grant proposal that we will develop is trying to get a whole set of people, instructors across institutions to institute this kind of course at their own institutions, and then we'll test to see whether it's similarly effective at their institutions.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of studies about that, about critical pedagogy and engineering ethics. It seems like there could be other data sets you guys could draw from different institutes.
Totally.
So when you're leading these class discussions about social justice, and there's no single answer, or really class discussions about ethics in general, how do the students react? How do you walk them through dealing with topics that don't have clean solutions, even though they are pressing and real and present in the world?
Well, I'll go first, Elliot, on this one. I've actually been surprised by my students on this one. because as a philosopher, I take seriously the difficulty of coming up with the right answer. So I actually think there is a right answer. So in philosophical language, I'm what's called an ethical realist. So I think there is a right answer. But I'm also, for the purposes of instruction, I'm also, and I tell my students this, I'm an ethical skeptic, which means that although I think there is a right answer, I don't think we can know what the right answer is. So that even if we all agree, we could be wrong, and there could be a right answer, and we're just all getting it wrong. And that to me was a way of trying to set up the problem for them in an interesting theoretical way. Whereas, okay, so here's what surprises me from my students. The students come back to me with, after we discuss many problems that I think are intractable, well, we know what the right thing to do is. And we all agree. We know what the right thing to do is this. The difficulty for us is whether we would actually do that thing, not knowing what the right thing to do is. And so that to me becomes a really interesting issue, because I think now we've moved into the realm of kind of the psychology of ethics, right? And I think it would be really interesting to get a psychologist engaged in this and have them talk about, well, when people make the decisions that they make, are they basing them on what they think is the right thing to do, or to what extent are they basing them on this sort of calculus that they're doing, saying, well, I know this is the right thing to do, but I'm actually going to do something like this to approach that won't get me in as much trouble. And I think like whistleblowing would be a good example, right? Whistleblowers historically never win, right? They always suffer from whistleblowing, and yet we always tell people, well, yeah, you should whistleblow. And all the students are just like, well, why would I do that? Even if it's the right thing to do, it's gonna damage me so badly that the motives for doing that have to be pure. And honestly, I'm just not that ethical. And I think that's not something that we want to communicate to students. Like, yeah, you're really weak-willed. You should whistleblow, but you're not gonna, because everybody knows that would get you in trouble. So I think I'm surprised that my students come at me with that. But I think that that's another ripe area for further research and experiments.
Yeah, so for me, I have another research thread on ambiguity in engineering problem solving. And I think there's a domain specificity here. I think my students are prepared to understand that social problems are not easy to solve, they're intractable, that there are multiple possible paths you can take. It's when they get into the technical engineering things where they've been taught, do this calculation and you'll get the right answer. And then we give them an open-ended design problem where you could go multiple ways and there's various technical decisions you have to make in order to come up with a solution. That's where they struggle, because I think they've been taught that technical problems are straightforward, single answer. But for societal stuff, I think they understand that that's the kinds of problems you're dealing with. It's putting the two together that is tricky.
And so important, as you showed us from sex work. All right, we are out of time. There's some really interesting questions in the chat left. I would encourage you guys to post them on the discussion board for the community of practice so you can get going, ask each other as a collective how we can follow up on Britt and Elliot's work and contribute what all the rest of us are doing in the realm of engineering and social justice. So thank you so much, Britt and Elliot. Thank you to the OEC's director, Dr. Rosalind Byrne. Thanks to our coordinator, Courtney Walker, and to all of you. So this is my last webinar for the OEC after 2 years of hosting it. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. Feel free to go back and watch our previous talks on the OEC's YouTube channel. And yeah, let's look forward to future work in this space. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.